I am sure that all of us have slightly coloured memories, and all of us have some probably different memories of certain instances. There is, I mean, the band themselves would, like we were talking, Dave or Nick would say, "Oh, you remember on that tour we did this and you did that?" And I said, "No, I didn't." And
yeah.
"Oh, yes, you did. But Dave, do you remember when you drove the motorbike into the hotel?" He said, "I don't do that." You know, it's all this, not just because he forgot. I mean, it's very interesting, the coloured memories. And of course, it's been used so much. But if you remember the 60s, you weren't there. Phrase, I think John Peel coined it. I don't know.
I think it was.
And
yeah,
it's kind of true.
You were living it.
We were living it, yeah.
So are we starting?
We're doing it.
We're doing
we're
it,
starting.
okay.
Everyone quiet a bit. So I'm interested in your, maybe just start off because it's something that I'm curious about. In a way, I have a feeling that you were probably the most musically competent in the beginning, certainly. I think Peter Jenner
That's what people said.
Yeah.
And
so were you trained in how did it start?
Well, actually, as you know, I met Roger and Nick at architecture school, Regent Street Polytechnic. I mean, that's all history, but actually basically was thrown out after the first year because I wasn't studying. In fact, I was going off to the London College of Music, learning piano and composition. And then actually before that, I went to a private music school, which wasn't really great, but it was okay, called the Eric Gilder School of Music in Denmark Street, where I also learnt piano and composition.
Classical.
But I never got past grade 5 on the piano or something. But I did have some musical education, yeah.
And it was a classical music.
Actually, the Eric Gilder School of Music I liked it because it was actually more jazz orientated. It wasn't a classical school of music. The London College of Music was.
Yeah.
But I was really going to London College of Music to try and to develop my technique and to actually learn to sight read, which I can't do now, so after all these years. But, I mean, yeah, people say I was the most musical. I mean, it depends how you describe what musical is. But, I mean, I have to say one of the memories, because we're talking about memories, was that when we finally went to Andrew King and Peter Jenner and said, "Look, this is just not working. Syd, what we want Syd to be another Brian Wilson, if you like. And we'll go out on the road without him." I don't know if it was Peter or Andrew, but they kind of persuaded me, they want to persuade me to actually, okay, you go off with Syd and the band will be you and Syd. Which I didn't do, obviously. It was tempting because of his huge talent, but I knew that it would never work.
Why?
His madness, because of what had happened. And there was always hope that he would recover. But I think even in the right very soon afterwards, I think everyone realised, including, expert opinion, that he will not recover from what happened to him.
Because I think that ties in with what Peter has told us in the sense that he felt that you were the two who were the musical sort of standard bearers, that the other guys were still learning in terms of technical competence.
In terms of technical competence, yes, this would be true until Dave joined. I would say that Roger was extremely important for all sorts of reasons, but he was still, he wasn't the world's best bass player. I'm not the world's best keyboard player, but there was a sense that, the musical input was probably coming from me and Syd. But there's lots of other things that go into making a record apart from the music. I mean, so...
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Can we just stop for a moment?
Yeah.
There's some noise. Is it music coming
downstairs?
Back to college days. So suggests that if you were doing music in between your architectural stuff, that you were sort of thinking of that as maybe a profession.
Oh yes. I mean, I wanted to do music I mean, as a child, I didn't have much. I didn't really believe. Well, I didn't know how I would do it and which way. But I mean, even when I was at school, I wanted to. I mean, I studied trumpet and I studied piano and things at school, and that's what I wanted to do. But I was clearly not advanced enough to go into the classical side of music at all. So that's why I went to architecture school, just because my careers master said, why don't you try architecture? But my heart wasn't into architecture, so it was perfect when we got together, obviously.
What was it?
But a lot of musicians came out of art schools and architecture schools in those days.
Yeah,
It was a big breeding ground for the music of then.
What did you see as? What kind of band did you think of yourselves as? I mean,
God, that's
that's very
well,
early.
as you know, we started off playing blues, and I don't think any of us. I certainly didn't see what kind of band we were going to be. I guess R&B and blues. Although we hadn't written anything, I was very interested in learning or beginning to write music. I had actually written a song way before I even met the band. I had one song published on the B-side of Peter and Gordon, actually, Two of a Kind, which, funny enough, has been credited to Syd.
Yes.
But it was actually, I wrote it even before I went to architecture school. And anyway...
it was recorded by Syd, wasn't it? Or
well,
with you playing as well, I think, in a BBC session? Or
this is where my memory is not clear about that.
I think it's on the... I might be wrong.
Yes.
I think it's on the latest compilation.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Two of a Kind.
Yes. What was I saying? So
yeah, sorry.
So we digressed.
Yeah. You'd already written a song.
Yeah. So yeah. Oh, what kind of band?
Yeah.
I had no idea. It just grew. I mean, it's like maybe if you do a painting and you start off with a splodge of red, some people might have a clear idea how it's going to end up. Other people it grows. And so I had no idea. My love of music then was most definitely jazz. Although I was brought up on classical music, because my parents were very keen on classical music. My mother played the piano and all that. So that's obviously a big influence. But jazz, I mean, Miles Davis, the 50s, Miles Davis and Thelonious Monk, all these people, that was my love at the time. And that was when I was listening to jazz when I was in school. But I didn't think I'd ever be... Well, maybe I wanted to be a jazz musician, actually. But the way things turned out, it didn't happen.
There's quite... I mean, I guess
but
one can... Are you all right? Sure.
Your question.
There's quite a sort of jazzy sound. I mean, I think the initial playing of those long interstellar overdrive takes, there's a lot of improvisation there, isn't there?
There is a lot of improv. I mean, I'd have to say probably a lot of... I mean, I remember myself and Roger and lots of us listening to Stockhausen and people like that in those days, electronic music. I'm sure, and that was probably an influence as well. We were playing in the dark, if so to speak. We didn't really know what we were doing and what was going to happen, which is why it was very exciting. I mean, I think you could say a lot of the music we played then was pretty bad. On the other hand, some of it was amazing, because it was totally experimental. Except for Syd's songs. It's quite interesting that although Syd's songs had very strange structures to them, and lyrics like no one else had ever written before, or since, or maybe since, but they were still kind of, not pop songs, but they were still kind of constructed songs in a sense. But and then we'd then go off to do Interstellar Overdrive or Saucer Full of Secrets, which is just very experimental improvisation.
I mean, I guess when you say a lot of it was
So
bad.
I always seen a kind of, not a difference, but it was quite interesting
Yeah, I mean...
between his more structured songs. But I think that experiment, and that was happening, you know, even while he was writing the songs, like back in Powys Gardens, and we were doing both, if you like.
When you were at the architectural, Regent Street Poly, Mike Leonard, the tutor, was your landlord, wasn't he, at that time?
Yes, he was, well, one, he was our tutor for the first year, and he was also the landlord, and he also had a keyboard, and he was very keen to be the keyboard player of the band. That was quite interesting, quite funny, because I kind of joined the band. Then there was a period when I wasn't with the band, because we were all up on holiday or whatever, and I think he sort of tried to get in, wanted to be part of the band. That was quite interesting. And then I remember his disappointment when basically we said sorry, like Richard Rick's the keyboard player of this band. But yes, we all he lived upstairs and we lived downstairs in this house in Highgate.
He's still
where
there.
a lot of stuff was done. I mean, the beginnings of the band.
It was kind of formative period.
Very, very formative, yeah. Because I know it was 66 because I remember watching the World Cup there with Roger. So 65, 66 we were living there, I think. Certainly 66. And that's, I don't know exactly when I met Syd, because I think both Roger and Dave knew him, and I think Syd actually played in some group. Dave was in a group called Joker's Wild. I'm not sure if Syd was in that band.
I don't think
so. Anyway,
but
Dave, I'm saying Dave and Roger knew Syd, and then when he moved down, he went to Camberwell Arts College. And basically how we got together. Through the Cambridge connection. That's how Syd got in. Because we had Bob Close before then.
Oh, right,
I think. Was it before?
Yeah.
Or, yes.
Yeah, we met Bob Close the other day, actually.
Oh, yes? No.
Yeah. And I guess what's so interesting about that period, looking back maybe, as an outsider as well, is the sort of move from being this very much kind of R&B-ish, imitating that sort of sound.
Syd was a huge fan of Bo Diddley. Huge fan. I mean, he loved Bo Diddley, and that's how we started off. I mean, we did. Is King Bee a Bo Diddley song?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we do R&B and some Bo Diddleys and attempting the blues. And it's when Syd started writing, and I don't know exactly again when he first wrote his first songs for the band. And I'm not even sure whether he had songs already written before he met us. But that changed everything. Definitely. Because, of course, we were all totally knocked out with what he was coming up with.
Yeah.
And to be honest, the Floyd would not have made another great blues band. I mean, Syd was not an Eric Clapton, and I wasn't, the greatest blues Hammond organ player, or Farfisa in those days, of course. So I was, of course, extremely fortunate that Syd actually joined the band.
So was there a moment when you kind of felt, wow, we're really moving into something different?
And not a particular moment. I can't, not a moment as such. No, not a gig or a time. I just remember the first, doing the first album was incredibly exciting because we were doing things very different to anyone else. We were refusing to cooperate, for example, with what the record company wanted. And in that sense, we had great managers with Peter and Andrew because they were on our side. They weren't the managers saying, come on, boys, you've got to do a hit single. For example, when we see Emily play, we were touring virtually every day, but of course we never played it live. We refused to play it live, not out of spite, but and that of course caused huge problems with the audiences as well, because they had. It was fine in London because we were the underground. We were the underground band in London, you know. But as soon as we went out of London, they wanted to hear See Emily play, or whatever, and we refused to do it. So there were a few beer glasses and stuff being flying around. But
so the expectation of this, you know, the pop, you're in the top of the pops and you're in the hit parade, and you turn up and you don't play the pop song, and you play this long, you know, like
I mean, the people come to hear See Emily play, and I mean, you know, we were having the screaming girls and we had all that, and Syd was definitely a star, and he did like it actually. I think Syd really enjoyed that part of the fame thing, and I think the rest was sort of more uncomfortable with it. I think Syd actually liked it, and. But doing the first, well, it was, yes. I mean, there's times when we were playing, even at sort of private, or at colleges, or even private parties, when we did our lengthy improvisations, and people were liking it. I guess that, yes, we all realised that we were onto something. But I'm trying to think of his name, Pete Murray. I always remember Pete Murray, because they reviewed, I don't know if it was Arnold Lane or See Emily play, but he said, well, this band will last 2 weeks. That's it. Really put us down.
Jukebox Jury.
What?
Was that Jukebox Jury?
Yes, probably, yeah. Now, I may be wrong on this, but our band's reaction to what he said was that we actually built a huge jack-in-the-box with a boxing glove inside it and sent it to him. The little snippet, and I think it was for him. I think it was Nick's idea, actually. Never found out what happened when he opened it, or whether it was probably went to the BBC. They probably checked it before he was allowed to open it. Anyway.
Probably jumped out and punched the poor assistant in the face. Pete Murray's gatekeeper.
Yeah.
But, that must be one of the most, the sort of classic wrong statements in the history of rock and roll, really.
Mm-hmm. One of them.
This band will only last 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, they just had no idea. I mean, it was, you know, as a period from '66 on, I mean, it was an extraordinary time. And, I mean, my children, my grown-up children, I have often said that they wish they had been children in the time I was, you know, growing up in the '60s. They kind of said, well, what, nothing happening now. And it must have been amazing. And there is this whole idealised sort of, I don't know, concept of the '60s. Some of it's true and some of it isn't. Because, you know, getting back to Syd, a hell of a lot of damage was done to quite a few people. Sadly, Syd as well. So, but then the idea of it all being totally, everyone's out of it on drugs. I mean, everyone was smoking pot, I have to say. Which is, again, why they say lots of people can't remember what happened in the '60s. But it was a special time. But I suspect we got away with some of the stuff we did because everyone in the audience was quite stoned. I mean, I just remember, I don't know which tour it was. I don't think it was the first tour in America, but I remember one time in America, Roger got really angry, and we were playing somewhere, and he got really angry and threw his bass down and stormed off stage, right? We tried to carry on for a bit, and then I decided this is ridiculous. So I went off stage, and then we eventually all went off stage. This is without Syd. We all went off stage and then started having a big argument in the dressing room, trying to persuade Roger, let's go back on. Meanwhile, the audience are sitting there, not a sound. They're having their own good time. We come back, I suppose, 20 minutes later and carry on as if nothing had happened. Now, I don't think you could do that today, somehow.
Sort of laid-back quality to it all.
Yeah, right. Well, there's all sorts of
Or
stories.
maybe
I
the
don't think-
lights just kept making beautiful patterns.
that the way the audience reacted to us. Everyone's heard the stories, and it's true. I remember in the Fillmore, East or West, probably the West, when there was one moment. There's all these famous stories, but Syd literally went on stage and just stared straight into space and detuned all his strings on his guitar and hitting it until it was just this god-awful noise. And we, of course, think, what can we do? What can we do? And the audience seemed, this is great. They loved it. So,
Wow, man.
yes. So they were all out of it. But the interesting thing, because everyone says, well, was the band also out of it? And, well, I speak for myself, no. I quickly learnt that smoking actually made me paranoid and anxious. And I can't speak for Dave and Roger or Nick, but I suspect there wasn't a lot of drug taking with the band because we wouldn't be able to perform, actually. Well, I certainly couldn't.
You had an incredibly rigorous schedule, certainly in '67.
Yeah.
I was thinking that. How on earth would you manage to get yourselves?
Well, some people can. Of course, but I, for example, I had one. I did have a joint somewhere in Paris, about 3 hours before the show. Just a tiny little. I used to smoke. We all did, but I would only take one puff because that was enough. Otherwise, I'd get totally paranoid. Didn't agree with me, and but one day I don't know what it was, and then I just lay in the hotel, on the hotel bed, really terrified of going on stage. And I said, I'm not doing this again. And then when I went on stage, I remember that it was a weird feeling that I suddenly thought I'd been holding down one note with my finger for about 10 minutes. And that so didn't agree with me at all. So that idea that the whole band were out of it on drugs, clearly Syd, well, he wasn't out of it on drugs in the beginning, but the history of Syd, So after that, it appeared that he was.
Yeah,
but he wasn't. But then he totally damaged himself beyond repair.
Because this is the big puzzle in a way that some people involved seem to dispute. Was Syd an acid casualty? That's.
Oh, I don't think it's. Well, in my mind, absolutely 100%. There's always been this talk, particularly with the band and various people, what would have happened to Syd if he hadn't taken acid? Was he going to go that way? And that we can't answer.
But you've got no doubt about it.
One?
You've got no doubt that.
But I have no doubt. You see, again, we all have very coloured memories. I remember my memories of it was that, and it may have been happening before, but my memory is that we were recording a Radio 1 show at the BBC, and Syd didn't turn up, and I think it was a Friday, and no one could find him. So we basically waited, and I think we had to cancel the recording, or we tried to do some without him, I'm not sure. And then the managers went off trying to find him. And when they found Syd, which I think was a Sunday or Monday, they told us that, something's happened to Syd. And something had happened to him. Total difference. And there's some rumours, and I don't know, that he was living with a whole sort of community of people who were very much believing, rather like Timothy O'Leary, that, acid can release you and, get to the truth and all that stuff.
Yeah,
that was a Timothy...
Cromwell Road, 101,
yes.
Yeah.
And one believes, I think that he may have been with this group of people and that he took too much. There were other people who said people were spiking his cups of tea with acid. I do believe that he took a huge overdose.
And it was that sort of weekend that was a big change in him that you experienced.
In my memory, that up until that point, he was a very, he was outgoing, charming, wonderful, friendly, you name it. I mean, a wonderful man, and it was for me a huge change seeing him after that. The lost weekend where Syd was lost, huge change. Like he'd gone, he was still looking the same, but he was somewhere else. So I believe that acid had a huge part to play with it. I really do. And there's people, as I say, that, well, if he hadn't taken it, would he have gone this way? But the psychiatrist Ronnie Lang,
Yes.
Ronnie Lang?
Yeah.
I believe, again, I believe that we managed to get him to see Syd, and his opinion was that it was hopeless. He had done so much damage. Because acid, that's what it does to you. Too much acid would literally fry your brains. And I don't know many other people, but I've seen other people who have taken too much acid. It definitely does change the whole pattern in your brain. So yes, I personally do believe it was a 99%, if you like, was the cause.
And I guess that
I'd be interested to know what Dave and Roger and Nick feel about that.
Nick believes that too. I think Roger thinks it's a mixture. I think he felt.
Well, I was saying, yes.
Yeah.
It's what, yeah.
But I was thinking that
Clearly, if you look at the
thing-
lyrics of his songs before he was taking lots of acid, he was kind of out there somewhere, in a sense. But in terms of being a social human being, you know what I mean. In terms of relating to other people, he was wonderful. So yeah, that has always been a thing. Well, would it have happened even if he hadn't taken this acid? But clearly he did, and I clearly think he was. I don't think he possibly even wanted to take all that much of it. I think it was a terrible accident, or unfortunately people persuading him to take too much. That's what I believe.
And I was just thinking that if that had happened, there was sort of like a crisis of identity.
Right.
Over that weekend, then maybe his his feelings about fame, his feelings about enjoying the whole thing would change. He would start to become frightened of it all.
I think he just wasn't aware anymore. In a sense, since that happened, and so it did. Yes, it drastically changed. Of course, totally unreliable, for a start.
That doesn't help, does it?
Doesn't help. But yeah, I mean, it's a hard one. I'm just saying, convinced acid did cause it, but maybe he could have gone that way anyway. But I do remember this weekend; it was such a drastic change. But he was still functioning, you know. I mean, and very clever and devious as well. And sometimes, like he was trying to teach us a song. Have you got it yet?
Oh.
When Dave had joined the band, because Dave was going. The whole idea was that Dave would come in the band because Syd was not capable anymore of really playing, and he would stay at home, as I said, and write the songs. But we thought we'd have a transitional changeover with Dave and Syd playing. Anyway, one of the songs was "Have You Got It Yet?" And he would be teaching us the chords, and then he said, no, that's wrong. And he was deliberately, as a joke, changing certain parts of the music. And then, of course, we said, we are so stupid. The title is "Have You Got It Yet?" So he was very clever in this way, things like that. But, and if you ask me now what's superior between when he took this acid and when it was just impossible, I'm sure. Certainly not a long time, months at the most, I would think.
Because
it was clearly that he could not be in the band.
From See Emily Play to...
I mean, we went to America.
The American trip,
of course,
yeah.
While he was in this state. And It was like he was coming and going, in a sense, but very strange. I'm sure this story's been repeated about the Mandrax or the Quaaludes and the Bill Cream.
No.
You heard that story?
No, tell us about that.
Oh, I thought everyone would tell you that one. Oh, we're just like in the dressing room one day, because it was really hard. We always think, well, is Syd going to make it tonight? Is he going to get on stage even? And then someone came in, I don't know who, don't know if it was any member of the band or so. You've got to come and see what Syd's doing. And he'd crushed up all these Mandrax and mixed it up with Brill Cream, and then rubbed it in his hair, and then came on stage, and it all started melting. So bizarre.
I presume he just had no
Man?
self-knowledge of that.
But
no.
clearly he must have been, although it was very difficult, he must have been playing and sticking to some of the chord sequences and things. Because,
Or you were
but I
covering
say,
up.
it was such a mad time anyway, even without Syd in his condition. We were just either recording, or we were travelling, or we were on stage. And that is why it is a kind of blur for me as well. So for me, these little memories will stick out of Syd, but a lot of it is a blur, quite honestly.
There's talking about See Emily
To run
Play.
out, actually.
Sorry.
I'm about to run out, John.
Okay, let's cut.
Can we just cut and change?
Yeah.
Carry on. Dot again.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we could just backtrack on that, because you were saying that you'd always hope that he would come out of it.
Yes, because we're talking about the fact that he was it appeared to be coming in and out of it, like the Top of the Pops things, where the first one, obviously it worked okay, and he was very keen on it, and the second or third, yes, it was a disaster. And you didn't know, like, for example, is Syd going to perform, or is he just going to stand and stare in space and do nothing, or detune his guitar? We never knew. So
What did you do in those circumstances? I mean, it must have been agonising.
we covered up for him as well as we could and played very weird music. Had to cover up his awful sounds, if you like, coming out of the guitar, and this obviously, and I just tried to play around it, as far as I remember, and so did all of us. And because of the time, I think, as I say, the audience kind of accepted it. Not always, but a lot of the time. They just couldn't believe what was happening on stage, basically. I think that was it. Because the audiences at the Fillmore were sort of brought up like the Grateful Dead, Big Brother, Janis Joplin, who were all basically performing quite well. And this weird psychedelic English band not playing anything they recognise goes on stage. Very strange.
And presumably they thought
And I'm
that
sure
was all
watching Syd must have been one of the most, they must have been amazed. Who is this? What is this guy and what's he doing?
But perhaps they felt it was all part of the look and the sound.
It's quite possible, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just English madness.
Yes. Right.
What was your own personal memory? Was it of like panicking and in the American tour, like wanting to get out, get home?
No, I don't. I think a lot of it was it was really exciting. How old were we? 24, 25, going over to America and staying in hotels. We all shared the same hotel. I mean, we're all sleeping in the same room in a hotel, a Chelsea hotel, for example. Actually, thinking about it, it wasn't so nice staying in a hotel. But it was very exciting. And I think because my memories aren't so much of, oh God, this is terrible, there must have been a lot of times when Syd was performing okay. Actually.
Yeah. So it was a mixture of good and terrible.
But I couldn't tell you now, that gig he was together, and that gig he was hopeless.
Do you remember the American TV, I think it was Pat Boone show, where
It's not the hamburger one.
Oh, don't know. Tell us that story.
What is it? Jack Good? What was the
There was Dick Clark and
Dick Clark? That one. Oh, well, that was. We'd gone on to. Well, I'm pretty sure we were going to mime, sing, or do Arnold Lane or See 'Em Play, one of those, or both of them. And of course, I think he comes up and has a chat with you first, and then you often do your number. And that was pretty embarrassing, because he wanted to speak to Syd, because Syd was the lead singer. So he said, "Okay, well, Syd, what do you like about America?" And Syd just stared into space and didn't say anything. And we all go, "Oh God, come on, Syd, say something." And then he says, "Hamburgers." And then and the audience are complete. And then he says, "Oh, great, wonderful, Syd." And then the applause thing comes up. But then, of course, what happened was we then did the song, and Syd is obviously the lead singer, but he couldn't mime it. So we had to have a discussion, and then Roger did the miming for the song. So Roger was miming Syd's song. I think it may have been See 'Em Play. So Roger had to mime Syd's part, if you like.
but Syd was still standing there.
But he was still standing there, yeah.
How bizarre! I mean,
It was bizarre. Yeah.
And was that the point when Andrew King pulled the plug? I mean,
Andrew King didn't. Oh no, I mean, we pulled the plug, and that was back in England. And you'd have to check. I don't know the dates, but I do remember that we just said that is enough. We cannot do this. He's going to be Brian Wilson, and we'll go out without him. And Andrew King and Peter Jenner thought that was a terrible idea, and actually tried to persuade us not to do that. And that's when one of them tried to persuade me to go off with Syd. He said, "Well, if that's what's happening," they tried to persuade me to actually stay with Syd and carry on as the Floyd, I guess. Well, yes, with Syd, which I didn't do.
your life would have changed.
It
if
would
you
have
had.
changed.
The
Yeah.
next 30 years would have been rather different.
It might have been, yeah, who knows what would have happened, but yes, it would have been rather different. And sorry. No, what was, sorry, we were going on from, when we realised.
Actually, I was thinking of Andrew in America, deciding to cut the rest of the tour. Well, I think it was him that decided that. When you're still there, it becomes clear that you just cannot keep going.
Yes, I'm sure that happened, yeah. I mean, I remember playing the Cheetah Club, and that was awful. Again, a lot of memories of covering up what was going on. When we played in Holland, again, I don't know the dates or where it fits in, but I think we played in Holland, then flew back to play at Crystal Palace. And I think
Alexandra Palace?
Alexandra Palace. And in Holland it was pretty difficult with Syd, I think, but by the time we got to Alexandra Palace, he was gone. But we didn't start playing till about 4 o'clock in the morning. And I think maybe that had some of... I think it was a lot of gigs. And we were trying and delaying this, of saying Syd can't play anymore with us. Because we all loved him. And we all, it was a tragic thing. And we all really wanted to believe that he would become the Brian Wilson. Well, not Brian Wilson who'll stay in bed for 2 years, but, actually become the writer for the band. And that's what we hoped was happening. We went off and did gigs, and we were hoping he would bring material, which didn't happen.
There's a few songs like Jug Band Blues, I suppose, is one, which was produced and came out on record, but there were a couple of others, Vegetable Man and Scream Your Last Scream.
Yes.
Were never released, were they? Actually?
No, they're never released, right.
But that's that sort of period when Syd's clearly, he's gone through that big acid crisis.
I mean, it's in... Yes, and Jug Band Blues. I mean, I actually just listened to it very recently because we're doing a compilation, and that's going on. And it was quite interesting to hear it. I mean, he's singing well. Well, the band's performing well.
And it's quite a song, isn't it?
And it is, yeah.
But it's got that element of...
But
it's sort of on the edge as well, isn't it?
it is on the edge. Oh, absolutely. Yes. And one of the hardest things with, actually, even when Syd was okay, with his writing was he'd quite often change the time. And, it would be in 4/4, and then suddenly he'll miss one beat of the 4 beats of a bar and go into something else, which made it extremely hard, especially for the drummers and bass. And I always remember trying to learn this. And sometimes he knew exactly what he was doing and he'd repeat it every time. So that was fine, we learnt it. But other times he didn't. It would be totally random, his timing. That was a hard one. And that was, even in the beginning, he did have a wonderful sense of timing on his songs, actually. But I mean, the sessions when I was doing Barrett, that was really hard. But then he was, all sorts of things were happening then. I mean, that was when Dave was producing and I was trying to help as much as I could. I mean, there were moments, very sad moments, like we're in Abbey Road and where you record this, we're in number 2, I think. So that's, I don't know if you've been in Abbey Road.
Yeah.
Well, number 2, it's probably changed now, but before you had the control room right at the top of the studio, and then it's huge stairs to get down. I was always terrified he'd fall down, but he'd be sitting on his stool, so he was kind of a long way away. Okay, Syd, start singing, and then sometimes guitar falls off or he falls off, and other times he could do it. A thing I do remember about that was pretty interesting, was we were trying to get him to do a guitar solo, I don't know which track, and he just could not do it. There's no way he could do it. I mean, it was impossible. And I think it was the engineer, but I'm not sure. I mean, it doesn't matter anyway who thought of it. They said, well, let's turn the tape around and play it to him backwards, which we did. And then suddenly he came out and played all this stuff. Just turned it around and it was very good. But frightening. Well, the only way we can get Syd to play now is play everything backwards. It was a bit... it was a struggle. But some things came out of it, at least,
Absolutely.
It was worth doing. Because it was all Dave, me, Roger and Nick. We all wanted to help him as much as possible. And we always have done right up until today.
I mean, that Barrett album is, it's a favourite of Robin Hitchcock, for instance.
Yes.
It has got some wonderful songs.
It has, yes. Yeah.
And I don't know whether it's obviously stood the test of time somehow as songs. They've stood up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
But I was wondering how did you get involved in that? Because you weren't involved in Madcap Blast.
No, I wasn't. No, I think that was basically just Roger and Dave saying, well, let's try and help Syd. I don't know, but I think possibly Roger had enough. Maybe he didn't want to attempt to do the second one because it was difficult. And finally, I thought, again, my memory obviously wasn't completely right. I thought I'd gone in to help produce the album, but obviously I didn't. So I went into, I just remember going into, because I really wanted to help Syd and I want do what we could with Syd, and so I went in with Dave, but he was producing it and I was doing the keyboards. And I've forgotten what the question was.
Oh, just how you got involved, which...
Oh, how I got involved. And but it was... In some ways it was easier, I suspect, because we were only going in for a couple of hours here, or one day here, and 2 days here, and then we were off on the road again. So when we had time, I think I couldn't have done it if it was, well, let's do a month's work with Syd. I couldn't have handled it, I don't think. But it was always, okay, oh, we got Syd today. Well, I wonder how he's going to be today. Is he going to turn up or whatever?
So you never knew really from one day to the
Pardon?
next. You never knew really from one day to the next.
We didn't. Well, I don't think we really knew. No.
Did you think that it was actually going to emerge, this album, or was it? Did it have a kind of sense that it might be doomed?
I asked Dave that. I certainly thought, is this ever going to work? And is there going to be an album made? Definitely. It was. And, a lot of it, if you listen to it technically, it's pretty rough, obviously. But I still think it was so worthwhile to do. And it just, for all those people out there who love Syd Barrett, it was definitely worth doing. But I think after that, I don't think anyone could have got him to do an album, quite honestly. I think that was it. Because I think there were attempts for him to even play it at some point. But I don't know when that was. And I think Dave did gigs with him or something.
One
gig, right.
Yeah. with Jerry as well.
Now, it's interesting that, because I don't really remember that either, but I suspect maybe I was asked to do it, and I probably said, I don't think so. Because I was doing the keyboards on his album. But I don't know if that gig was after Barrett or before.
I'm not sure, actually.
No, right.
70. It was 1970, I think.
70. Well, Barrett was done in 70.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think, yes.
Probably around that time.
Yeah, around that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you... you said that you felt you always wanted the hope that he'd get better and that he'd pull it together again.
Yes.
But I guess by then,
well,
what did you feel?
I think, by then, he kind of disappeared, went back to Cambridge. And the word was that he is a bit of a vegetable man. I always wondered whether he wrote that song knowing that he was. Interesting title. He was kind of a vegetable. But the news was always that, well, he's okay, he's quite happy. And and all he wants to do is paint and whatever. So we all thought that was it. And then of course the big, I talk about not remembering things, but one thing that really stands out and I'll never forget, is going in to do the Shine On sessions. When that's so clear in my mind, because I think, Roger was in the studio already, and I walked in, I think we were listening through to it. We were actually listening to that track, Shine On, I think. And Roger was in there first, and I came in, and I don't think Dave or Nick had arrived. Anyway, we went in the studio, and I saw this guy sitting at the back of the studio. He's only as far away as you are from me. Well, I didn't recognise him. So I sit down next to Roger, and we start doing whatever we're doing. I said, who's that guy behind you? Friend of yours? And Roger said, you don't know who he is? And I said, no. And I kept on. And it took me ages. And then Roger said, that's Syd. And I just cracked up. I couldn't believe it. Because by that time, he'd shaven all his hair off. He was about probably 17, 18 stone. His eyebrows, everything. And he was jumping up and down, brushing his teeth. It was awful. And Roger was in tears. I think we were both in tears. It was very shocking. Very strange that he came when we were doing that session.
Absolutely.
Really, I think we're talking about 95, so 7 years of no contact, and then to walk in while we're actually doing that particular track. I don't know, coincidence, karma, fate, who knows, but it was very, very, very powerful. And of course he stood up and said, when shall I put the guitar on? So that was pretty hard for all of us to take, I think. And then he went out of our lives again. And we tried to have conversation with him, but it was very hard. Very, very hard.
God.
Yeah.
That
Oof,
must have been
it was
like
that was awful. I mean, that was the physical change was what shook me. I think because that he was on lots of drugs and cortisone or something. That
yeah, I'm sure the drugs made a
and I
huge
think
difference.
that's what had done it.
Yeah, but the fact that you're making this record that's I don't know whether you would consider it all about Syd, but it certainly had a lot of Syd references.
Oh, the actual. There is. I mean, well, it's Roger because he wrote the lyric, but obviously "Shine on You Crazy Diamond." That's it is about Syd, and even some of the stuff in the Wall, in a sense, is about Syd. And "Wish You Were Here." I mean, yes. I mean, it wasn't as such an album dedicated to Syd Barrett because it would have said it, but it certainly was. It was a big it influenced Syd's condition obviously influenced or what Roger wanted to write about, try and express it obviously lyrically, and I think it's our best album. Personally, I love it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with you actually.
Yeah.
Why do you love it?
I love it lyrically, but I also love it just musically, and I love the flow of it. And I just think, I mean, I will listen to that album for pleasure. There's not many of the Floyd albums I can, but that one, I don't know. It's the way it all builds up. That main track, from the wine glasses to the saxophone to then the quiet bit, the little bit of guitar, and all that, and then into this really interesting sequence of chords for the song. And I just think it's a great piece.
We had Dave picked up his guitar during the interview and started musing about how he'd got the sound and started to play that opening section,
Oh, really?
which was very nice. Yeah. So
Right.
I mean, it's such a great, the emotion coming in with the music before the words.
Yes.
Quite a long.
It is, yeah. Right.
And pretty unusual for I mean, even at that time, for.
Yeah, there are two moments. It's quite interesting that there's two things in terms of what has developed from a very simple thing. One was Dave's guitar, da, 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 and the other one actually was the very simple ping on the piano note, which developed into echoes, which though I think lyrically for me is a little bit not so great. I still love that piece as well. I think it's a great example of Floyd echoes as well. Both of those came from very simple ideas. Quite interesting. And that was in the days when the band were working well together.
Actually, it's interesting you say that because Roger referred to it as "Wish You Were Here" as he said something like it was as much about a sense of bereavement for Syd, but also he was starting to realise that the band wasn't going to stay together.
It was, yeah. I mean, in a sense that's true because it's this thing of not being there, and it was the last. I think it was the last album where we worked well together, and actually, interesting. You're saying Roger. I know that when we started off, there was a kind of we weren't putting our heart into it. Maybe because of the success of Darkseid, I think Nick found it quite hard actually to get back into playing strict tempos or whatever. And Roger certainly said, "Look, we've got to stop and start again." And the disagreements did start at that point in the band. Yeah, definitely. But I still think it's our best record.
And I guess part of that it has to be because there's a lot of, it's sort of driven by this sort of feeling, emotion in it, which is all about Syd.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Yes, I mean it was. And I just say, I think lyrically, absolutely, was very true what you said. And also, I just think musically, for some reason, the chord sequence that I wrote with Dave or whatever, it really gelled. It was something quite interesting.
Prior to that, Darkseid, there's even in that, there's brain damage.
Yes. Yes.
Again, you know.
Well, yes, right. I don't know if at that point Roger was referring to Syd, but I'm sure they had an influence on that. But, you know, everyone said Darkseid of the Moon really is about madness. So, again, I'm sure the experiences of Syd would have influenced Roger into what he wrote. Roger's big influences, as you know, are possibly teaching, school, the war, and madness. And that's what he's written about, basically, for the whole of his life, whole of his career. Hope that's...
Yeah.
and most of the time.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I mean,
but as somebody who's obviously, you know, played a really crucial part in the sound of the Floyd, and you know, as a member, how did that gel with you? That I mean, were those also things that you were like, were important to you? So
the lyrical content.
Yeah.
No, well, that's interesting. No, quite often I don't think it would be true for maybe Dave or Nick. We were sometimes going to get a little bit tired of this constant lyrics about the war. It was a bit of... I'm not criticising Roger. He needed to do it. But it would be something, oh, not again. You know. Haven't you dealt with this by now, kind of thing. And so, no, I didn't agree with some of the sentiments. But then I wasn't the writer. He was. And he has, you know... And we tried to put the best music we could to it. And as a musician, I've always found it more... I haven't laid that much importance on lyrics. It just happens to be me. If you ask me to sing all the old songs, even now, not our songs, but Bob Dylan's, I probably won't be able to tell you the lyrics, but I'll be able to do the melodies. That's just me. But...
it's just
so I could tend to listen to lyrics, but not actually really listen to what they're saying. I listen to lyrics as part of the music. That's just me.
Sure. I mean, that's very true of jazz as well, isn't it? That the voice is another instrument.
Yes, that's right. But he was the only person writing. I mean, he was our writer. He was our lyricist, and very, very good lyricist.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was his preoccupation with, as I said, these three things.
Why do you think Darkseid was so incredibly successful?
It touched a nerve, obviously, somewhere. It has got a remarkable sort of continuity to it, I think. It's like you need to hear it all the way through, I think. I remember when we actually finally decided to play it live again, which was wonderful. That was on the last tour. Because we hadn't really played it live since we were playing it on, what would that be, 73? 3. And we decided on the last tour to actually play it through its entirety. And which I thought was a great idea. And it was wonderful because actually, well, all the musicians who were working with us, they all knew it anyway quite well. But what was great was we said, okay, because we're doing some of the songs, us and them, and money obviously, and time. But we then said, okay, well, let's play through it. And it was remarkable, I thought, for all of us. We actually went through the whole thing with mistakes. But basically, it's like your hand for just taking you, but, you know. It was really... And then when we had... It was great fun to do. So that wasn't answering why I think it's a great, you know, successful album. I think it's a combination of the lyrics and the feeling of some of the music with the lyrics. It's, obviously, that's what makes a good song. So, I mean, but yeah. I think it's the continuity of it. And it did have it kind of this whole musical and lyrical story, if you like. It all made sense.
Yeah.
Even though some songs weren't related to the other, like Money was not related to Us and Them or whatever. It tied in. But I can't tell you really, at the end of the day, how to make another one. Obviously.
I guess, thinking about it, it's not so. It's a concept
And
album, but it's not such
I also
an obvious
think it
thing.
was
Yeah.
probably at the height of mine and possibly everyone's period of creativity. And also, it was a time when, there were disagreements between me and Roger, and we weren't the best of friends, but as a band, we were working together. And everyone was encouraging each other. So it was just maybe I Wish You Were Here as well, but there were slight strains there. But definitely Darkseid the Moon we were working together. And I've always believed that's the best Floyd music has come from that, actually.
There's two, the Darkseid.
When it's a combination of Dave and me and Roger, let's say the three of us writing together. Obviously there's individual songs which I didn't write or Dave didn't write, but basically just being in the studio playing together. And Roger saying, okay, that's great, it's a chord sequence. Okay, I'm going to try and write some words to that and go to another, and come back. And that was a good time.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get that going again.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking about the Wall is a much more, it's a concept. I mean, it's a massive sort of hugely ambitious concept. Right. Whereas the Darkseid and Wish You Were Here, much more subtle in a way.
Yeah, so it's very different, yeah. But we're getting off Syd, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
Going back,
it's okay, but...
in terms of the influence of Syd on the subject matter, I guess that's where...
Oh, yes, it all started off, yeah. And that's, yes. And clearly Wish You Were Here was an influence from his condition or whatever how you want to describe it, for Roger to write. But I think Roger's right as well, when he told you that he felt that the band were, in a sense, not all together as well at that point, which probably influenced him to write as well what he wrote.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, so it's two layers.
It's two layers, yes.
Wish You Were Here, the sense of missing Syd. I was wondering about when he first left the band and David came in, did you really miss him at that point as a songwriter, and was it really difficult to change?
Missed him as a person, of course. We all still desperately miss him, because my memory here in my head of Syd is what he was like before he went crazy. I haven't seen him grow up since he was 24 years old, so my memories of Syd are very warm, if you like, of how he was before. Of course, with the huge sadness of what happened, except that one moment when we were doing that session we talked about, when I saw him, of Wish You Were Here. But in a sense, it was, in some ways, a huge relief to have Dave in the band, because we could now, didn't have the fear of what's going to happen next or whatever. And we then started trying to learn to write. I mean, Roger and me and Dave were, becoming songwriters, if you like. And I have to say, in the beginning, not great songs at all. I mean, I look at some of the songs I wrote, some I'm rather embarrassed about. Lyrically, definitely. But I learnt that actually I wasn't a good lyricist anyway. But I think because we didn't have Syd, what the band said, well, what do we do now? I think our answer was we did these lengthy improvisations.
Which was something you'd started with Syd.
Which we started with Syd because, like Interstellar Overdrive, really was probably his riff that he had and played it, and where do we go from here? And I'm sure that's when I started doing my improvisation or whatever on the keyboards, with him possibly following me. The Fillmore West.
Mm.
But that was probably because I also remember on the same bill was Janis Joplin and Big Brother and the Holding Company and whatever.
Are you running?
Anyway, and other gigs have no memory at all where bad things must have happened for Syd or with Syd. It's strange, it's interesting.
You'd remember Janis Joplin.
But what?
You would remember Janis Joplin, yeah.
Oh yes, I remember Janis Joplin. She was marvellous. She was wonderful. What was funny, I remember we went back to the dressing room and she was going on after us, and we said, "Oh great, we can have a drink." And there was Southern Comfort bottle, totally empty. Where's it gone? And I said, "Oh, Janis drank it," because she was apparently, well, she could obviously get through a bottle of Southern Comfort. Anyway, those were great days actually. No, but I just thought of one other thing, because we're talking about when we knew we couldn't work together, because it was quite interesting, is that at some point I didn't have anywhere to live. I don't, obviously. Anyway, Andrew King's father had a flat up in Richmond Hill, right opposite where Jagger has his house now, I think, or next door, something. Anyway, and so I lived there with Syd, and for probably only a few weeks, and I think they thought it would be nice if I could be with Syd and try and get him to write and encourage him to write. But we were all going on the road constantly. I mean, literally every day, every afternoon we were off on the road, up and down the motorway or whatever. And I had to, and Syd was meant to stay at home and write. So I couldn't tell him where I was going. I'd say, "I'm just going out to get some cigarettes, Syd." In fact, be going off to do a gig. Because if I said I was going to gig, he'd say, "I'm coming." You know. So that was quite hard. But then, of course, when I came back the next day, he would say, well, he wouldn't say, "Have you got your cigarettes?" But as if I hadn't been away for 5 minutes. He lost all sense of concept of time. And that is why possibly when he came to Wish You Were Here, it was 7 years. Maybe in his brain, it was one day. Because he had lost, I know that, he'd lost all sense of time completely. So that when I went out of the flat and I was sharing with him for a night and coming back the next day after a gig, it probably for him I had only gone out for a couple of minutes. That was scary too.
Sounds like it was like living with a shadow of a person almost.
It was, and because actually we were, I mean, I remember we had a group car then, I think we had an old Bentley, which was a death trap, but we thought by that time we deserved a good car. It was awful. But anyway, I had to park it around the street so he wouldn't see it. Anyway, we were on the road. I mean, you have to, in those days, if we were getting 4 hours sleep a night, we were lucky. But we couldn't afford to stay in hotels, and really, so we were going up and down the motorway constantly, then into studios. So I hardly ever saw him when he was staying in the flat. I remember I would go out and get food for him, because whenever I came back, it was nothing. So I'd just get more food and put it in the refrigerator. Because we had decided definitely by then he wasn't going to be on the road, but we still hoped he'd be writing.
And it just didn't happen.
And it didn't happen, no. No. Very sad. I mean, the whole story is such a sad story. And I just hope, wherever he is in his space, I just hope he's happy, and that's what I've been told, that he is most of the time happy. And that financially he's okay as well, which is important. I mean, obviously he wasn't, we would all of us do something. But for his needs, from what I understand, I mean, no one asked us for anything. You know, the royalties have come through. And this new album will bring him more, and he doesn't need a lot. I just think it's so sad, because he was a great artist too. A potential artist, and I hear he paints and then he burns them, which is a real shame, because I'd love to see some of the art that he's doing, or was doing.
Did you keep any of his old pictures?
I haven't got any, no. No. Sadly, I wish I had.
Have you tried to contact him at all? I mean, seen recently?
No. I think after the Wish You Were Here instance, when he came in, I think all of a sudden he thought, we really want to find out, how he is. And all I know is, I think Dave must have got in touch. I don't know if it was Dave, but got in touch with his mother and said, look, we really would, what can we do? Or we really want to, can we see him, or can we? And basically she said, don't come to see him. Don't talk to him even. Because it could trigger off. He said he's happy. Basically saying he's quite happy and content in what he's doing. But he still has some recollection of the band. And she was worried that if we came, that it would trigger some bad feelings inside him, or whatever. So she said, very appreciating what we were feeling, but it was best for him that we didn't get in touch. And I don't know how I could handle it, quite honestly. It's always been a dream that one day would go and see him. Obviously. But it would be extremely painful for me, and extremely maybe painful for him. And I could take the pain, but I don't know if he could. So it's, it's, as I say, it's sad. Because you think his career was really just, 1.5 albums basically, over a space of 2 years.
So brief, isn't it?
Very brief. Yeah.
But to look on the good moments in a way.
Yes. Right.
To end on that.
Yeah.
There are these fantastic moments. I mean, for instance, Peter Whitehead has cut together this. It's about 20-25 minutes that he shot in the sound techniques and in the UFO of Interstellar Overdrive, and there's some great moments.
Oh,
there.
really? What,
yeah.
When did he do that?
He was
because he did the
Let's Make Love in London.
Yes, right.
He used all the outtakes from that.
Oh, right.
And he was asked by C for Miles, I think Miles, Miles, exactly.
Miles, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So he's done it.
Oh.
And
recently?
It's only recently been out on a videotape.
It is on a videotape?
Yeah, and I found it, and I went to see Peter about it, because I thought it...
I mean, you can buy it in a shop, you mean?
You can buy it in a shop.
Goodness me.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're going to try and put something of that in.
Yes.
But it's the best example, really, of the band at that
I have
period,
wonderful memories. All this sadness we're talking about. There are also the great memories of being in a band with Syd, when he was such a joy and so outgoing, as I say, and it was, just to be with him was wonderful. We had so many laughs and fun. So those moments are very precious for us all.
He had, talking of fun, he had a terrific sense of humour, didn't he?
Amazing sense of humour, very bright, yeah. Very much so. Yeah, but so we'll leave it at that. Yeah, on the bright side of it, it was. It was. So we all have I'm sure, very good memories of being with Syd, and lots of fun. And great fun when he would. I'm not saying great fun, but just amazing when he would sit down and come into the room with another song that's done in basically in 20 minutes. Here's another one. Virtually finished, if you like.
You said it earlier that his songs had this quite complicated, intricate structure to them.
Yes.
Can you give us an example of what were you thinking of?
Well, Bike isn't a good example because it just slows down a lot. A Scarecrow. I mean, it's a weird timing in that. Black and green, I mean, it's not in 4/4 all the way through, and And as I said earlier, sometimes he'd have these weird changes. He'd go from 3/4 to 4/4, or he'd suddenly miss out half a bar. And as I say, sometimes that would happen every time. He knew exactly what he was doing. Yet other times it would be quite hard to record because he would miss out half a bar somewhere, and then when it come to redo it, he'd include that half bar in. But quite a few of his songs do have these weird time changes in them. Scarecrow. I mean, I'd have to sit here and sing through them to tell you which one. Yeah. That's what made his songwriting kind of unique as well. And his lyrics. That was, yeah. And because his lyrics, I think we were saying right at the beginning about, like, I thought it's like very childlike. As I was saying, I think he could, if he could have been, if he wanted to be, before it all happened, was, you know, and to write wonderful children's books. I mean, I do remember playing some of the songs to my children, and they loved them, like The Effervescing Elephant, even Scarecrow and Bike. I would play these songs to my children. I have to start playing them to my young child now, actually. And they loved them. And the lyrical content, you know, I have a mouse called Gerald. And all this weird stuff, combined with the psychedelic kind of spacey sounds that we were doing, it was a strange combination, actually.
I think just on the lyric side and the sound, Arnold Lane, for instance, as a pop song,
you see, yeah.
You know, where does it come from?
Arnold Lane actually is one of his more straightforward lyrics, I would think. The amazing thing about Arnold Lane was it was banned because it was a song about a man stealing women's underwear off a washing line, which is based on a true story. But can you imagine that would be banned back then? And now what are they showing on television or listening to it? It's incredible, actually. But again, yes, what a great lyric. I mean, no one would ever dream of writing something like that. Arnold Lane had a strange hobby, collecting clothes. I mean,
people didn't write pop songs
People did not write songs like that, and then come up with this rather strange chord sequence as well. I understand why so many people still, especially you were talking about, you know, the younger musicians who will listen to his songs and be totally influenced by it. Because we lived it and we did it and we were there, but for them it's a whole different world, and it's pretty amazing.
I played the bootleg version of Vegetable Man. I think Peter Jenner released it surreptitiously. It's extraordinary, like a punk.
Yes.
Beginnings of punk, you know. He's rattling out this.
Yes, I know. I mean, I haven't heard it. Probably was recording it, but and Scream Thy Last Screams. Yeah, in some, yeah, punk. I guess. I mean,
like 10 years before punk, or whatever.
Yes.
8 years before punk.
Yeah, right.
Something about him, obviously, that he was musically just an original to be able to do that.
Well, that was, when it gets this whole point about, was it the acid that did it, or was it going to happen anyway? I told you that I think acid had a huge part to play in it. But then if you look at his lyrics, one has to say, where was he anyway when he was writing this stuff? The black and green scarecrow. I mean, it's wonderful stuff, but what kind of mind was coming up with these images of Lucifer Sam and all sorts? The lyrics were very powerful, but very, very strange. And I think they came flowing out of him. I don't think he'd sat there and religiously, try to work. I think he just, a lot of the time, just came out so quickly. So his mind was somewhere else, a different part of the planet to most people's.
But and also just on the songs, but you as a keyboard player, clearly you responded like with great enthusiasm. I was thinking of like Jug Band Blues, for instance. It's a fantastic keyboard sound in there. It's almost like
You're not
it
thinking of
inspired
the
you in a way.
actual Salvation Army one bit, are you?
Oh, the Salvation Army was in there too, weren't they? Yeah.
Yes, we got I think it was Syd's idea. I think he'd seen a Salvation Army playing in the streets and said, I want them. Got them in. And of course it was the thing, well, what do we do now? And he said, well, do anything, just play whatever you like. It's actually, I would say, what young bands are now listening to. Not really so much Darkseid of the Moon or Wish You Were Here or The Wall. It's actually that early work with Syd a lot. And I hope he knows that somewhere in his world, that he has influenced so many people and he's inspired so many people. I just hope he knows that, actually.
That's a good point to end, actually, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.